So people think that they can eat terrible food and then I'm eating yogurt, kefir and something like that. No, that's not enough, right? Because one, you've got to feed your good gut bacteria. So you've got to eat a ton of diverse plants. Are you eating a lot of plants? Are you eating a lot of vegetables? Are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough fiber? Is far more important than whether that one biscuit you ate had one preservative or not. All the things that Instagram is and YouTube is worried about is not on any actual expert's list of dangers at all.
Is it orthorexia? What do you say?
Orthorexia is this sort of modern phenomenon where...
Hello guys, welcome to another episode of our podcast Gut Feeling with Dr. Pal. In this episode, we have a wonderful guest, Krish Ashok from Masala Lab. He is a wealth of knowledge. So in this episode, we talked about how to include fermented foods in your diet, especially Indian foods, and many interesting facts around it. Should we really have to worry about broiler chicken, organic, GMOs? Oh my God, I learned a lot in this episode.
It is easier to change your environment than to change your willpower. Right? So if you have snacks, you will eat it. If I'm consuming more than I'm creating, then that's unhealthy. Even when you're consuming actual probiotics itself, your stomach kills 99.9% of them. Your stomach acid is like very strong.
In terms of organic milk.
Drink the milk that works for you. And if the moment milk is causing you bloating, diarrhea, that's probably time to reduce dependence on milk. If you look at the health advisory information from all the major countries in the world, so what are they largely warning people about, right? And categorize those risks as the most universal ones are all.
Hi Krish. So good to see you in person.
Absolute pleasure. Always good to see people you admire in person.
Same here.
Yes.
We did a podcast like a year ago.
Year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. And then I remember I was in a cruise. Okay. And then the discussion was about aluminium and everything. They asked me, so, is it okay to cook with aluminium, Dr. Pal? I said, look at this guy. He's the guy for that. If you have any problem with the gut, you let me know. So, that's a welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Gut Feeling with Dr. Pal. So, right into the topic. So, people know you for debunking Indian cooking, Science of Indian Cooking, and you've written a beautiful book, Masala Lab.
Yes.
But I'm going to approach this from a content creator standpoint.
Yes.
As a fellow content creator,
yes.
I listened to one of your podcasts where you said you classify this infinite scrolling into two categories. Yes. One is you consume data, and the other one is you create data.
Yeah.
I thought it was wonderful. Yeah. Please explain that to my audience.
So this came out from I think the podcast interviewer had asked me about how do you balance your life, right? I mean, I've been on social media for like 17 years. And over those 17 years, I was then first a blogger, then I was a musician. I made like multiple...
What do you play?
So I play about 4 instruments. I play violin, cello, guitar and keyboard.
Wow.
Right? And sing. So I have 2-3 albums I did. I used to do... it was also a time when I think India had a better sense of humor. So we used to do these political mashups of taking famous people's voices and auto-tuning them. Very early day. Now it's very common, but we were pioneers, at least in the South. I used to do that. And then after that, I started writing about food, right? And doing science communication about food. And that's what led to Masala Lab. And now I'm kind of doing that. So the question was about how do you keep doing these creative things? How do you keep getting new ideas? How do you stay fresh all the time and so on, right? And how do you find the time? So for me, I think since my almost for the last 20 years, a part of my day job in the early days involved researching social media. So I have a deep sense of how the algorithms work and how it is designed and so on, right? And so because of that, and at the same time was also a creator. That's why I had this sort of very mutually beneficial relationship in that sense. So eventually over time, what I came to recognize is that consumption of this social media is sort of like analogous to like consuming processed food or sugar, right? I mean, it is like you're only consuming short form stuff, right? The algorithm only shows you 15 second stuff, 30 second stuff, only the most provocative sentence in an entire paragraph, right? And as a doctor, how big your medical textbooks are.
Correct.
the challenges of condensing that into 90 seconds or 60 seconds, right? You know you're going to leave out some stuff, right? You know it's going to make someone angry, right? But you sort of build that muscle. So I eventually said that for my own mental health, right, I need a consumption creation ratio in that that's how I have to manage my time, right? If I'm consuming more than I'm creating, then that's unhealthy.
Consuming more
than I create, right? So, for example, so I used to do this, apply it even when I hire people, and when people will say their hobbies are. For me, hobbies are important, right? Not what your skills are, because the interdisciplinariness is important, right? You have to have a life outside of just work. People will say listening to music. I say that's not a hobby. See, hobby has to be creation. If I say I play one Casio, I just play one Janaganamana, that is creation. But listening to buying headphones, that's consumption. Right? It's not creation. Watching a Netflix is consumption. It's not creation, right? So watching a movie, yes, even being watching serious movies, but then writing a blog about it, analyzing the themes, that is creation. Right? So even if you are not too confident to post it to the internet, even writing 200 words every day, right? Playing one song every day or whatever it is, that is creation. So in that sense, for me, no matter, so which means that you need to build a muscle to create without fearing feedback, right? Because somebody will come and say, oh, what is this? This is not good enough, right? This internet has more critics than creators, right? So that consumption content creation ratio is what largely has sort of helped me keep this balance, meaning that I literally then say, yeah, enough, right? So I used to use apps to measure the amount of time I spend on social media. Originally, like everyone else, I used to think, if you ask me, I'll say, oh, I only spend half an hour on social media. And then I will check the app, it will say 4 hours. People always underestimate, even I underestimated the amount of time, and then consciously tried to get it down to like 2 hours, 1.5 hours, and so on. It is really difficult because every time you want that dopamine fix, you'll go and say, oh, 100 likes, I got 20 comments and 10 DMs. So that because it is very hard to sort of resist that. Right? So which therefore also means that you have to do other ways to prevent that temptation, like not keeping some of these apps for a long while. For example, Twitter, I did not have on my phone. Right? I would force myself only when I am on my laptop that I will then log in, right? And then I had got into the habit of saying clicking on log out, which then added another layer of friction, which means that I have to log in, then OTP will come. Then I have to. So you have to sort of people have to add, just like how you as a food expert, right? You would know that it is easier to change your environment than to change your willpower.
Correct.
Right? So if you have snacks, you will eat it. So don't keep the snacks, or keep it in a very high shelf, right? Or don't keep it next to the bed, right? So if you keep a glass of water next to your bed, then you will drink it in the morning.
Correct.
But otherwise, you have to walk to somewhere and drink a glass of water in the morning, you will never do it, right? So it's the same thing, right? So try and change the environment around you so that you are constantly creating more, right? So note-taking apps, and those is what I sort of usually prioritize on my phone, and so that's how
you create a reminder.
I use this fantastic app called Tick, which is
like TikTok.
Yes. Very unlike TikTok because it actually helps you get things done as opposed to mindlessly scroll. But yeah, you're slave to that algorithm that TikTok has cracked. Your brain has no contest against the AI brain that is showing you things that you really want to keep seeing, right? And so on. So Tick essentially, I mean, in the sense that I really find it tremendously useful to just stay focused on. I'll immediately, anything I need to do, right? I just keep adding these creation tasks. Say that, I need to write the script for this video. I need to write a small little message for this on Instagram or the story and so on. And it has a very nice way of keep reminding you that, hey, this is what you need to do, right? And it's so I've found it very, very enjoyable. Actually, I discovered it thanks to one of internet's superstars, MKBHD, right? When he recommended, saying that of all the apps, this is what works for him. I said, yes, and that's what I'm going to use.
So you can use social media productively as well,
yes,
similar to what you are doing.
Yes.
So we've learned a lot from you, and I told you in the previous podcast as well, that as a physician, we don't know much about cooking. Number one. And number two, we don't know much about food to start with. I'm going to be very honest about it.
Yeah.
During my medical training, we were not never taught about food, nutrition, calories, and all this I learned by experience, mistake, and all those things. So I absolutely love your content where you talk about science.
Yes.
Science of rice, ghee, oil, you name it.
Yeah.
love gut, as you know.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
As you know.
Yes.
And gut loves fermentation.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yes.
And then you have talked about lactobacillus,
Yeah,
fermentation, and everything.
lacto-fermentation, yes.
Can you talk about that for us, please?
So for me, I think when I think back, my original sort of interest in fermentation actually goes back to when I was a teenager. We were transferred from Chennai to go to Delhi. Right. In those days, it's a 36-hour train journey. Right. Take everything, everything, all the house stuff went in a truck, in a container, etc. And then, we all took suitcases and we moved permanently to Delhi. I remember that the most important part of that journey, most important thing was not like jewels and other things. For my mother, the most important thing was to carry her curd culture, which she had been continuously every day. So we sometimes don't realize that in many houses in South India, the curd you make, that organism often dates back years, decades sometimes. Right? So people carry forward from yesterday's curd, they take a little bit, make today's, and it's completely continuous, right? So yes, of course, I mean, it may have mutated over time, but it still comes from that same genetic line, right? And so people, they treat it like a 70, 80-year-old, a living organism that
like a baby.
Like a baby, right? And you have to, and the prospect of a 36-hour train journey in Indian summer on a train, which means that you're going to, it is really how are you going to do this, right? And so on, and you kind of hope that you're going to carry 2, 3, 4 different things, you place it all over the place, and you hope that one of them does not like die out, meaning that it does not have enough sugars, right? And we somehow eventually made it, and she was able to continue fermenting. Of course, then Delhi we ran into temperature issues during winter and all of those other things, but in a sense that I think it really caught my fancy that this magic of what you take this highly perishable product that is milk, right? And also a product that, again, most South Indians can't even digest very well as adults. Right?
Correct.
Most South Indians are lactose intolerant.
Correct.
And we then derive all the benefits of that milk by simply introducing this bacteria that eats all the bad stuff, right? And leaves behind amazingly good stuff.
Correct.
And is something that if you drink a few times a day has tremendous sort of health impact. And now we are recognizing, as many of your videos say, that keeping a healthy gut improves your mood, it improves your chances of obesity, reduces your chances of obesity, and so many things, right? And so that is how it kind of got me very curious. And eventually, I think when I made that video that is now very popular, right, on lacto-fermentation, right? By that time, I had sort of started to go beyond what Indians just did in terms of, say, idli, right? And idli dosa batter, which again, my mother used to do, my grandmother used to do, and then curd, and yogurt. Then I started lacto-fermenting vegetables, right? And so on, right? So
like kimchi.
Yeah, so kimchi is the one way. So basically, the simple science is that lactobacteria have kind of evolved around human beings over the last 5,000-10,000 years as grains and other high calorie sugary items are around us. So these bacteria are like, oh, there's a lot of free food buffets there, no? So they've all co-evolved around us and co-evolved to the point where they're also able to live in our gut and sort of have that symbiotic relationship, right? So the interesting thing is that you can actually lacto-ferment anything, right? It's not just yogurt, right? So anything that has enough sugars or starches can be lacto-fermented. And because it's lived close to human beings, it has also become salt tolerant. Because human beings consume a fair amount of salt. Our food is also quite salty. And it has given it an evolutionary advantage over the other pathogenic bacteria, which are all, salt is a preservative in most cases, it kills bacteria. But up to 2% salt, lactobacteria is able to tolerate. Right, which other bacteria are not able to, right? So therefore, human beings have then figured out that if I keep that 2% salt solution and then put anything like carrots, right, any kind of vegetable, cabbage, or any of these things, garlic, chilies even, right, over a 2 to 3 week period. Sometimes some of them like cucumber and all will like 2-3 days, it's enough, right?
2-3 days of what?
2-3 days of submerging it completely under water in a 2% solution. So generally the weight of the vegetable and the water, you have to weigh together. 2% of that you have to add salt. So that's the 2% concentration.
See, let me understand this. So you take a weighing scale, you put a cucumber, you put water, and salt.
Yes. First, you put water. You put the cucumber. make sure it is fully submerged. Sometimes many of these things will float, so you have to put something heavy to keep it inside. Because otherwise, you want anaerobic fermentation. You do not want aerobic.
Aerobic fermentation.
That is the bad stuff.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then you have fungus also will form on top. So you don't want. Even now, yeast will form on top, which is harmless. Which as long as it is not black color, the white one you can just skim off. It's calm yeast, which is okay, not like poisonous for you, right? Then you will have the fermentation that happens underneath. Now,
No, wait.
So you measure. You measure.
Let's say 100 grams.
100 grams. So you give weighing scale. You put a glass. You tear it so that the weight of the glass is this thing. You put the cucumber. You add water. You see the total weight. Once you're happy with that weight, now whatever is that weight, 2% of that you add.
Okay,
so 100 grams means 2 grams of salt.
2 grams of salt. You put it inside.
Yeah.
So the salt will go down.
The salt will dissolve.
Dissolve
In that water. And then you cannot keep it sealed. You still need little breathe. So maybe a cheesecloth or some kind of cloth and a rubber band, right? 2-3 days. Keep paying attention and removing yeast that will come. White yeast that will come, right? And then in 2 days, the cucumber will ferment. And it'll have that same sour taste that yogurt does. Same lactic acid, right? Carrots.
Let me ask you, is this the same cucumber pickle that not...
So, yeah, historically, yes, but eventually industrial production of pickle, they cannot deal with fermentation. So, they just simply use vinegar or they use the acid directly. Acetic acid is directly used. Salt and acid is directly used. Here, you're letting the bacteria eat the sugars, produce the lactic acid and the sourness comes. So eventually you just, so right now it's actually, many of our historical pickles used to be lacto-fermented pickles. So your mango and all of that. No? They just, uppu manga is just basically salt and mango. That salt prevents other bacteria. Over time, the mango actually ferments, lacto-ferments. That is when it's actually probiotic and super healthy, right? Modern day pickles you buy from a store, factories cannot deal with fermentation. It's too unreliable, it's unpredictable. It's much harder. So they can only do yogurt. No, they don't do fermented pickles at all, right? So they basically just dunk the pickles in oil and something acidic and spicy and salt. So that way it is just simply preserved without spoilage. Excess oil, excess salt and those kinds of things, right?
So that mango pickle, tamarind pickle, that is not fermented food.
So what you buy in the store is not fermented food. What you make at home in a jar, where it's not oil, it's water. That is
exactly homemade pickle.
Yes, right. And sometimes you put the salt, you squeeze it, the water will come out of the thing. That itself is enough. You don't need to add further water in case of pickling. Right? That's what people used to do. Cram the whole thing. How is kimchi made, right? So you put all the vegetables, you add something salty, and you just squeeze the whole thing so that the liquid comes above.
Correct.
And then you let it for months, and then it will slowly lacto-ferment into the same thing. Yeah.
Usually, you have been in US, correct?
Yes.
And you see US pickle?
Yes, US pickle is now, that is again, this is industrially produced salt and acid fermented.
Oh, so that is also
vinegar,
not...
Yeah, it's vinegar and salt.
But that pickle is pretty big.
Yeah, big. They just cut the whole thing and you soak it long enough, right? And then it will slowly become
I see.
Your acid will denature most of the protein. That's why you get that texture and that's it.
Oh, okay.
So lacto-fermentation is usually all of the stuff that takes a little bit time, right? So your carrots will take a few more days. Cucumber is very fast, right? Chilies will take 2-3 weeks. So the beauty of fermenting chilies is that you can ferment the chilies and then make a hot sauce that will be so much more flavorful.
Wow.
And probiotic because it is a lot more umami because the bacteria will also create a lot more glutamates, break the amino acids and so on, and then also it will have that sort of more umami flavor.
Wow.
Right? So Sriracha, a famous hot sauce made in California.
Correct.
Fermentation is the key to its flavor.
I see.
So the 3 weeks they ferment.
But that is store-bought though.
It is store-bought. But the reason it's so globally popular is that only that company makes it and that they've always used fermentation. So they ferment and then after that to increase its preservativeness, then they add further vinegar and lime and other things to stop the fermentation. So you get the benefits of whatever it produced, but it is not probiotic. I mean, before they sell it to you, they are adding enough acid and salt to make sure that the existing microbes are killed. But it has the taste advantage of being fermented.
Wow. Yeah. Do you still continue your mother's cultures?
She is continuing her culture. I think although I have borrowed several times. So what I end up doing is that sometimes we end up traveling too much and then it's not possible, right? So then we'll borrow again, right? Or sometimes then it's too inconvenient, we'll buy from the store. So on. But yeah, but she still continues.
She still continues. So, I talk a lot about fermented foods here because there are four F's that I usually say. The first for gut bacteria is fiber.
Yes.
Second one is fermented.
Yes.
Third one is if you have these two F, the third F is fun. You'll have fun.
Yes.
The last one is there'll be no farting.
Yes.
Okay. These are the four for good gut.
Yes.
So fiber, I think I can talk a lot about in fiber in my channel as well. But fermentation is a problem that even I am facing.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that India, the more I start to learn about it, maybe only one country where there are fermented foods regionally in every state.
Every state.
Every state.
Yeah. Because we are a tropical country, extraordinarily hotter than most of the places at the same latitude because of the Himalayas. They block out all the cold winds. So India does not have a cold winter. There is no snow in the Indian subcontinent outside of Kashmir.
I see.
Whereas, people forget that Delhi and Chicago are at the same latitude. Chicago is like that Day After Tomorrow movie, this is level under snow, right? But Delhi is not, right? And so it is. So it has always been warm. So generally, there've always been a lot of microbes. I sometimes once did a pizza masterclass of some kind in London. I just went and that person said, "You put the yeast. We don't use the packaged yeast because it's too fast. Slow fermentation produces more flavor. So you need to use that sticky." Raw unprocessed yeast, that natural yeast that people again like they hold in families. Some Italian family they've been cultivating this yeast culture and so on. And it will take a much so it might take even 2 hours to ferment. And I told him that in Chennai bread dough ferments in half an hour. Because so he's thinking European temperature, room temperature of 18 Celsius. So you have to forget when recipes say room temperature, right? People assume 18 Celsius is room temperature. Chennai room temperature is 30 Celsius.
Correct.
And at that temperature, bacteria yeast are like super active, right? Yogurt here 4 hours done. Right? So something much longer.
Chicago 2 days.
2 days, yeah. And 2 days that you get a more slimy texture. That's also the problem, right? So 4 to 6 hours is when you get that nice thick that sort of texture as well.
Is kimchi same as your fermented cucumber or cabbage?
It is all the same lactobacteria. There may be different families of lactobacteria, but it's all lacto-fermentation.
Lacto-fermentation.
Yes. So the ones that I said the kombucha, for example, it is it's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast.
I see.
That's why they call it a SCOBY, symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So that thick, mother culture they call it, the kombucha, the bottom will be one. Yes. That is that living symbiotic the relationship of that fungus and bacteria.
I see. They say that if you don't see that is not true kombucha.
Yeah, it's not right. So it's not because the interesting thing there is that yeast produces alcohol.
Yeast produces alcohol.
Bacteria produces lactic acid.
Correct.
Right. So the proportion is what ensures that it doesn't become too alcoholic. Right? So kombucha is alcoholic.
Correct.
But not by much.
Correct.
Right? So people sometimes forget that fermentation by yeast, output is alcohol. Even when you bake bread, right? Your bread dough, pretty alcoholic. Then when you bake the bread, the alcohol is mostly evaporates. Right? Even your idli batter will have a tiny amount of yeast also because see, it's there, it's free food, correct. Right? So fungus will also come, right? And yeast also has pretty much become salt tolerant, right, around human beings. So it is going to ferment, and so your idli batter will also have some amount of alcohol. Only when you steam the idli that alcohol is mostly gone.
So the other question is in terms of heating the dosa, right?
Yes.
So dosa is a fermented food.
Yes.
And
dosa, so that's what. So the batter is probiotic, but unfortunately you can't eat it. It's not very edible. Idli and dosa will be post-biotic, meaning that
post-biotic.
So all the microorganisms will start dying at 50 Celsius.
But there will be still some left.
No, so in South India, what will happen is that people will make the idli and then they will keep it at room temperature for a while, and then it's going to start to ferment again. So, but otherwise, so once any cooking process above 50-55 Celsius, all your bacteria will die. So these are considered normally post-biotic in the sense that you get the benefits of all the short chain fatty acids and all the other things that the bacteria created in your batter, that you get. But you're not getting live organisms, right? So live organisms you're going to get when people in South India, also a lot of poor people eat that kanji.
Correct. Palayasur.
Right, Palayasur, that is again the classic lacto-fermentation, rice under water for anaerobic fermentation. It has salt, and then you're eating with, because sometimes it can have that funky taste, they eat it with other pungent things like onion and things like that. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking this is, I get this all the time,
Yes.
where I say eat idli.
Yeah.
Okay, low calorie,
Yes.
high fiber.
Yes,
And
correct.
But no, it is steamed, it is, especially for dosa, it's heated, everything is gone. I said, even if everything is gone, the benefit is there.
You still get the benefits.
Ah.
See, the fermentation is not about, see, other thing people forget, that even when you're consuming actual probiotics itself, people forget that your stomach kills 99.9% of them.
Correct.
Stomach acid is like
Acid is so strong.
very strong, right?
Correct.
We are hoping that even for billion bacteria, you only need 100,000 to survive.
Correct.
Then they will replicate.
Correct.
And here's the interesting thing. Even the ones that replicate and reach your gut, the existing gut bacteria will also not allow new bacteria that easily. They will also compete.
Absolutely.
So that is why benefits of eating probiotics is you have to eat daily. You have to keep replenishing. That is how you eventually build diversity.
Correct.
You eating one thing once, probiotic is not going to help at all, because then bacteria will die.
Absolutely.
You need to keep sending reinforcements. Right? So you have to pass through your digestive system. You have to pass through the stomach acid. Then you have to keep doing that, right? So
you know, the bacteria in your large intestine is like a mafia over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a pharmacological drug mafia.
Yes.
Where whatever, let's say you have grown your gut bacteria with pizza.
Yes.
That gut bacteria will make sure that nothing else will come in.
Exactly. So it takes a lot of effort to.
So research says 3 months.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
3 months.
And therefore, so people think that they can eat terrible food and then I'm eating yogurt, kefir, or something like that. No, that's not enough, right? Because one, you've got to feed your good gut bacteria.
Correct.
So you've got to eat a ton of diverse plants, right?
Correct.
As much diversity as possible.
Correct.
Right? People, if you're only eating potato and rice, that is not very. Yeah, you need greens, you need things that are resistant starch, right? And see, also we think, say, for a lot of Indians, the full dal, the whole dal, many people can't digest, right? But way more fiber and right, etc. So again, you mix and match, right? So you may not be able to eat brown rice like every day.
Correct.
Then there are other risks of brown rice also absorbing more arsenic from the sun.
Right.
So people sometimes forget that food is not about this is the right way.
Correct.
You got to do a ton of
variety
things and de-risk yourself that out of the 100 things you do, 2 things are going to not be great.
Right.
So people forget, so Mediterranean diet, a classic example. They'll say, I can eat all the butter I want because French and Italians are eating so much saturated fat. I said, boss, they are eating saturated fat, but the number of greens and fresh food they eat and the fermented food they eat, their constitution is such that they have so much good gut bacteria that the saturated fat is not going to harm it.
Correct.
Right. But you are only eating Parottha, salna, and biryani and that. You're not exactly, harming
the same thing. Yeah.
So it's about that, right? So therefore, if you have a generally healthy diet during the week, and then weekend you're going and eating Parottha, this thing, then you're fine. Your body can take it, right? I mean, is that people sometimes forget that either they want to do a puritanical, I will never eat. I said, that's never going to happen, boss, right? If your office guy party invites you and you say, no, I will not eat maida, I will not eat. That's never going. It's not practical. Then you will add to stress. Then people will not like you, will not grow, you will add stress, and that stress is going to harm your gut bacteria.
So that's a follow-up answer to that is, I say in my channel, not eat anything after 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Some people take it very religiously, which is good.
That's
but to a point that they go to a restaurant, when everybody is eating around, they are saying that I am following Dr. Pal.
Yes, correct. Those dangers of followers, that's like how there'll be some of my followers who will go to some random person saying something about Ayurveda and say, Ashok said this is wrong. I said, boss, relax. That guy is just enjoying his life and posting something. Right? Why are you guys going and needlessly CC Masala Lab? Please comment on this. No. I'm not in the business of, judging what other people eat or what they do, right? Yeah.
So what I say is, that if you're comfortable with that, that's a different story.
Yes.
But let's say you're exercising a lot of willpower to do that, then it's a problem. So in that case, you eat at 8:30, just compensate for the next day by eating a little bit late.
Yeah. These are not like hard-bound rules and all
yeah.
that.
So coming back to kombucha.
Yes, kombucha.
I want you to say, do you have kombucha?
I do have kombucha,
You have kombucha.
right? And it's now become pretty popular now, and there are many local companies selling the one with tea culture as well.
I see.
So you can also get the processed ones where that is not there, so it's not fermenting any further. But they end up adding a lot more sugar.
I see.
So
when you buy kombucha, you'd look at the bottle. At the bottom, there'll be like
that SCOBY is there.
SCOBY is there. SCOBY is there.
Right.
And how about kimchi? Is that popular in Chennai?
Very, because Chennai has a very large expat Korean population.
I see.
Because of the manufacturing, Hyundai and many companies that have. So, and Chennai actually has a lot of super authentic Korean restaurants, many of whom serve only Korean people. Meaning that when you go inside, you won't find Indians at all, because it'll be like hardcore authentic Korean food. You go there and they will place like 5 things. There'll be kimchi, there'll be so many fermented things, and you can literally eat like you're eating in Korea and so on. So it has become, and there are department stores that sell a lot of Korean groceries, Korean kimchi. You can get hot kimchi, mild kimchi, and all of that. And the added popularity of Korean pop culture, BTS and all of that has now suddenly made all of this pretty popular. Actually.
Not BTS, the drama.
K-dramas. Yes. Yeah, K-dramas as well.
Huge following in US.
Huge following. Yeah, their cultural soft power is insane.
It's super amazing.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
So shifting the gear from a gut bacteria standpoint, is in terms of, so people now know that, okay, I'm going to eat high fiber.
Yes.
Okay, that's good for gut. But at the same time, they have all these myths where vegetables cooking this way, that way, it's going to deprive all the nutrients, and I'm not going to get any fiber at all. So the first myth I want to ask you is, I've asked them, they've asked me, I don't know the answer.
Yes.
So I put a Pongal vlog in my native village.
Correct.
And my mom was cooking on I didn't realize it was an aluminium vessel. Okay. And they were like, Dr. Pal, how can you have aluminium in your kitchen? I really don't know. I was really, maybe it's really. Then I typed in, is aluminium is. The first video come up was yours.
Good. At least that came up, no? Otherwise, mostly 99% of stuff will be aluminium will cause Alzheimer's disease is what will come, right? The problem with the internet is that it prioritizes the worst cases. Right? That's a doctor. If you Google for symptoms, first answer is cancer. Headache also, brain cancer will be the first. And that is the nature of how the internet works. But so first and foremost, I think, the aluminium is actually quite straightforward. So we've been using it for 150 years, right? Ever. And it is 8% of the Earth's crust. Okay? It is the most abundant metal. And not only that, it is also remarkably, so therefore it's remarkably cheap now, right? The second thing is it's also a great conductor of heat, right? Compared to stainless steel, cast iron and things like that, right? So historically, this is a country that, while it is becoming wealthier, it is still predominantly poor, okay? For the most part, like my mother-in-law grew up only, like your mom, aluminium is what she grew up with, right? And so aluminium, therefore, you can save up to like 30-40% of your fuel cost if you're using aluminium, right? Because it is such a great conductor of heat, right? Yeah. So it gets hot very quickly and it loses heat very quickly, right? And so many restaurants will often use that because for them they have to cut costs.
Correct.
Right? So even in Western kitchens, right? You go to ultra fine dining Michelin star restaurants, the chefs will use aluminium pans for that fast grilling, of that meat and those kinds of things. They will quickly make it in that way, and it will get damaged very quickly, and they'll throw it because it's very cheap, and they'll get another one when they'll replace it, right? So I think so. A lot of myth essentially comes around the fact that the people wrongly believe that it causes Alzheimer's and all. See, plaques in Alzheimer's patients have shown to have aluminium in them. Okay. The Alzheimer's Foundation, they've clearly stated on their website that there is no connection between your dietary consumption of aluminium and that. See, because first and foremost, aluminium is everywhere. Your body already has some of it. Beyond a certain amount, it is toxic, but your kidneys, if you have functioning kidneys, it's going to remove. But beyond a point, you can get overwhelmed, etc. That's true of all metal toxicity, right? I mean, any other heavy metals, or this in this case is not even heavy metal, right? But again, even too much iron consumption also can have a problem, right? So like that, but aluminium, that amount is much smaller. Copper also, by the way, right? But in Indians believe copper somehow is amazing. Actually, copper is also pretty toxic beyond
But they have copper vessels.
I know. So copper vessels, but usually in the form of brass and other
Brass,
right? And less reactive. So like even aluminium, what happens is that given our humid conditions, most aluminium will oxidize. And aluminium oxide is completely safe, right? It is non-reactive at all, right? So you're not ingesting much aluminium from your food for 99% of cases, which is why even in my video I said, out of abundance of caution, if you're cooking like a fish curry or a kodambu or something that's like super sour, and you're slow cooking it over long periods of time, the acid might leach some of the aluminium into your food. So if you are like one of these urban people who has the privilege to say, no, that risk also I don't want to take, fine, go ahead, right? Otherwise, see, among other things like consuming more vegetables, consuming less food, doing more exercise, this aluminium and all these things are like
Bottom of the table.
really not worth paying attention to.
Is it orthorexia? What do you say? You have
so orthorexia is this sort of modern phenomenon where you're paralyzed by the fear that you're not eating right. And you're forever consuming like, oh my God, I saw one, you're taking some biscuit and you see the label and you see one small sodium benzoate, right? Of which there is some micrograms, right? And you're like, oh my God, I saw 3 videos that said sodium benzoate is cancer. I said, no, that's not how it works. You know, the interesting thing is that if you're eating small, modest amounts of ultra-processed foods, then you're largely okay, right? If you're eating too much, you're going to have problems anyway. Not from the preservatives, but from the lack of fiber and the fat and all of that. Not the tiny amount of preservatives.
Correct.
If you don't add those preservatives, those all will spoil. And if you eat spoiled stuff, that could be pathogenic actually. Right? So people completely, distort this entire thing. Right?
So this orthorexia, you think the aluminium consumption risk is orthorexia?
Classic sense of, so no non-stick, no air fryer, no microwave, clean ingredients. I will not eat anything I will not eat any ingredient that I cannot understand. All this is just complete orthorexia. It's completely impractical for most people. And you believe you're deriving a lot of benefits, but so the problem is people sometimes do a lot of things right and they see good benefits and they feel healthy, etc., etc. But then they will credit that one thing. Because I didn't eat aluminium only, that may not have been the reason. Then it may have been because they generally exercise, ate less food, they generally, so many of sometimes these diets, right? You do many changes at once. And then many of those changes together collectively may show some results for you. But then you will end up crediting something really, really true.
I'll tell you an example. That's a problem that, the question is whether exercise will improve gut bacteria or not. This is the problem. Okay. We are trying to answer the question with research participants.
Right.
Exercise and no exercise. Correct? Yeah. Obviously, this exercise group had good gut bacteria. But look at the food habits. The fiber intake is significantly higher.
Yes.
So now we don't know whether exercise is
a confounding variable, no? Right.
So same thing.
But here sometimes the problem is, there are people who will take that same research and come to a completely different conclusion to make a shot, right? They will say, look, this proves that whey protein and that extra protein consumption by this did not have, supplements did not have any effect.
Exactly.
People say you can come to any conclusion you want by citing whatever.
Correct. Yeah. So you're just going to be cognizant of what you are consuming.
Yeah.
Just as a bird's eye view.
Yes.
And then don't worry too much about the minute details.
Exactly.
I completely agree with that. The second thing that I always get is, okay, so people talk about, non-stick and everything, cookerware, Tupperware, whatever.
Yes.
What is the biggest myth that you want to break in that? I feel like we need to talk about it.
So there's just too many to list, right? In fact, I would actually tell people that if you look at the health advisory information from all the major countries in the world, including India and all the major Western countries, all the Japan, Korea, Thailand, Southeast Asia, many countries, they could make a mix of all of them, right? I looked at all of them, and I kind of looked at what are their governments suggesting in terms of diet, in terms of the dangers to health, etc. So what are they largely warning people about, right? and categorize those risks as the most universal ones are all alcohol,
smoking,
and your overall diet being imbalanced, meaning that ultra processed, etc. Ultra processed food and not enough whole foods and things like that. That is the primary risk. Right? Secondary risk are things like overconsumption of processed meats linked with colorectal cancer. Salami. Like again, because there are dubious results either one way or another. There are cultures like France and Italy where they've been consuming it for a longer time. But the overarching broad this thing is that maybe you might want to consume that not as much, make sure that you are consuming other things and so on, right? So even less than that are things like sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, microplastics, etc., etc. Right? So interesting thing is that nowhere on this list is microwave, non-stick. All the things that Instagram is and YouTube is worried about is not on any actual experts list of dangers at all, right? So at a macro level, that is what people are worried about. It is so at a macro level, you should also think how much you eat, what you eat, is it balanced? Are you eating a lot of plants? Are you eating a lot of vegetables? Are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough fiber, etc., etc.? Is far more important than whether that one biscuit you ate had one preservative or not. Right? So this is so I would actually say, rather than say which myth or the worst myth, anything that does not fall in these three things, you can probably deprioritize.
So non-stick is okay.
Non-stick is okay. Air fried food Teflon. Is okay. See, your stents, things, the implants you put in your body, they're coated with Teflon. So if that was going to cause you cancer and endocrine disruptor and all of that, we'd have known by now.
What do they say? EDC. ED.
Right? Yeah. See, people also confuse that the manufacturing process is very hazardous. And yes, there have been cases where the factory workers have been affected by the fumes, etc., etc. The finished product is not the same thing as the things that go in. See, even fertilizer, the things that go into making fertilizer are very poisonous. Right? Ultimate fertilizer is great for the soil. If you eat fertilizer, it's not very healthy either, right? So people completely forget that the end product is actually is safe, has been safe for like 50 years. People have been using non-stick, and bachelors have been accidentally ingesting small pieces when the non-stick pieces, and we have not seen any serious case of anyone suffering from any serious consequences where it has been tied back to PTFE, but specifically PTFE, right? And it has been so well regulated now that when they are not using certain PFOA and things like that, all brands will say it is PFOA free. So again, as I said, you as an individual, you might say, you know what, I am still not taking the risk, I'm going to use stainless steel, etc., etc., right? But then trying to then say that everyone using non-stick is consuming poison. You use what you want. Now, why do you have to make somebody else feel bad about their choices? You have no evidence. Nobody's stopping you from using cast iron, only clay, manchetti, all of that. You do that, no problems.
Air fryer.
Yes.
US, it's a very convenient thing.
Yes.
Very convenient thing.
It's very popular now here.
Here? Yes. So, people just start putting it in, and then, it's a good thing. Less oil.
Less oil, yeah.
But I get a thing that you asked me to decrease the calories and use more vegetables. Correct. And I use air fryer.
Yes.
An air fryer is causing EDC, endocrine disruptive chemicals.
Yeah.
Your take on it?
No, so it is again about balance, right? So, we all know we all eaten food, right? When I was a child, I used to come back home and I will say, okay, what is there? Rice, cabbage, curry, rasam, and I'll be like very disappointed because there is nothing crispy and crunchy and fried, right? So you want that dark roasted potato. So in that, we all have to remember that we want diversity in the flavors and textures in our food. Right? We need a papad, we need something that is crunchy, etc., right? But again, if you're eating 4 papads with this much rice and this much vegetables, then there's a problem, right? So, if you have one papad along with your rice, etc., and then maybe every day you're not eating just fried potato. One day there is beans, one day there is cabbage, and one day there is ivy gourd and things like that. So then I think we all crave crispy foods, right? It's an evolutionary thing because. We crave crispiness because historically our evolution, right, when we used to seek out fresh foods, etc., etc., Things that are crunchy are fresh. Things that are soft and slimy are likely to be spoiled and poisonous and so on. So we have a preference for things that are crunchy, right?
That's why we want murugal.
Yes, and the sound. So the important part is that you have to hear the sound.
Sound.
So it is actually, in fact,
Interesting.
reason a lot of food tastes very bad in economy class in a plane is because the engine white noise prevents you from hearing the crunch of food very clearly. So I often tell people, you want to enjoy food in an airplane, just put noise cancelling earphones and then your food will actually taste a little bit better. Wow. Because you are able to hear the sounds, the crunchier sounds of the crisper textures and so on. It's the same thing. So we like crunchy textures. Now, again, it is about balance, right? So on the one hand, if you have a history of heart disease and I think you're looking to consume less oil, your family has a congenital, sort of risk of that and so on, you want to be consuming less fried food, right? And therefore, you would rather air fry that food. I mean, it's a small convection oven. But at the same time, the trade-off is that it is heating the food up to like 220 Celsius. So at that temperature, any polyphenols, antioxidants, any of those things that were present in the vegetables are going to be destroyed. Vitamin C, many of those other things, right? So there is that risk. So if your idea of consuming vegetables in a day is only air-fried vegetables, you have to be aware that you're not getting some of the other micronutrients from the vegetables. You're getting fiber. Don't worry about it. So the common is fiber is going nowhere. Cooked or raw, yes, to some degree, cooked vegetables, maybe a little bit
Tiny
less.
bit.
Tiny bit. But it is still indigestible by your body. Let's not fool ourselves. So you don't have to overdo salads. Actually, many people, salads again, in many here, raw vegetables here, you have other risks. Right, of pesticide residues, bacterial contamination and all of that. Right? So you also have to be wary of those kinds of things. And in a place like India, you do want to, as much as possible, err on the side of eating cooked vegetables as much as possible rather than raw vegetables, right? Unless you know it is a farm that you trust and all that. Most people don't have access to those kinds of things. So you focus on that, but the moment you air fry that vegetable, of course it's high temperature cooking. You make it crisp, you remove the water, but you're also going to remove some of the micronutrients, right? So the antioxidants, polyphenols, vitamin C, vitamin B, they are the most heat sensitive. You don't lose anything else, right? So, and incidentally, just boiling vegetables is also going to reduce vitamin B and vitamin C. So that is why when you want to squeeze lime, you squeeze at the end, right? So that you don't lose the vitamin C. And also that is why I also said when you store, you don't lose anything in the fridge. You lose vitamin B and vitamin C when you reheat. And when you reheat, microwave causes the least loss of vitamin B and vitamin C. But people will say, no, microwave is radiation. Actually, boss, that is the best way to reheat food. Right? Yeah. So the interesting thing is that so this is the balance. So if you are saying, as in my meal, I have a little bit of rice, I have maybe a side salad, right? Then I have sambar which has dal and things like that, right? And maybe I have a steamed fish of some kind as the protein. Then air fried vegetables is a fantastic thing to balance that whole thing because you're getting vegetables and the fiber, but you're also getting the crunch because nothing in that plate gave you that crunch, and so it is good. Obviously, better than a fried papad or something like that, right? So you have to think of it in those terms, right? But if your goal is that I don't like vegetables, the only way I like vegetables is air fried vegetables, then you might have to sort of
look into it.
Yes. So and the other thing is that it's not like you're using air fried vegetables 3 times a day.
Correct.
It's a high temperature.
How about meat? Meat is air fried.
So air fried. So one other thing about high temperature cooking in general is that as the temperature goes above, generally above 110, above the Maillard reaction temperatures, right? The Maillard reaction between sugars and proteins produces fantastic aromas and flavors, which we all love, right? But at the higher end of that temperature, they produce byproducts, polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons, and things like acrylamide, particularly when you heat starch, like potato, French fries, is a classic, very high amounts of acrylamide, right? Those sustained consumption over time, etc., can also be problematic, right? And I know there was this thing that, like your oil-fried French fries versus air-fried French fries. The air-fried French fries have more acrylamide. because you're doing more dry heating over a longer period of time, whereas oil heating is for a shorter amount of time, right? But the better way to think about it is to eat less French fries. Right? And eat it more modestly and less commonly, as opposed to break your head over whether you're going to do air fried versus. If you are convincing yourself, no, air fried French fries is healthier than oil fried French fries, that's not the right approach, right? So yes, to some degree, you see, your oil consumption reduction in the context of sauteing vegetables versus air frying vegetables, yes, that's fine, right? But French fries, no, you must be eating less of French fries generally.
But for meat, air fried meat also decreases the nutrient?
No, so meat is, okay, first and foremost, meat is not nutrient dense like vegetables. So first people have to recognize that meat is primarily protein, but is also rich in minerals, mostly things like iron and red meat. And, so often, like our bodies actually mostly absorb iron better in hemiform, which is only myoglobin and hemoglobin, right? So therefore, which is why often vegetarians have a higher risk of anemia. Plant-based sources of iron, no matter how much spinach you eat, very small percentage you end up absorbing. And then our diet is also rich in dairy. It is also rich in things like dal and things like that. Those phytates and the dairy, all of that are anti-nutrients for iron absorption, right? So food is not simple, right? Each one will prevent something else from right being absorbed, right? So the thing is that meat is rich in fat-soluble vitamins in some cases. And again, depends on the diet of the animal. And industrially grown animals, again, are not going to be that nutritious in any case, right? The diet of the animal is not very diverse to begin with, right? But it is largely, again, protein. So risk of, again, grilling protein at very high temperatures, barbecue, and those kinds of things. Again, the same risk of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and acrylamide and those kinds of, those risks are there for any kind of thing, right? So very, very black charred stuff. So people sometimes, people like their meat sometimes with that charring, right? Vegetables little bit less so, right? Because it actually tastes good and so on. So again, sustained long-term consumption can have that. But again, if you're having some weekend barbecue, right? You're not eating barbecue and tandoor food every day.
Every day.
The tandoor food is actually going to be pretty charred every time, right? But I don't think you're eating tandoor 3 times a day. Hopefully not.
Yeah. So Krish, other reason to have you in the podcast.
Yes.
It's like a soul searching,
Yes. Yes.
I say all this. I go to a restaurant and then I say, hey, don't eat this much amount of biryani, split it into half. And then I say, don't eat parotta. Parotta is low fiber. You keep on eating parotta every day. There's increases for pre-cancer, colon polyps, and all those things.
Yeah.
The first thing, the number one, they say, you need to change your friend's name. I don't know, come on, some North Indian friend. That's number one.
Saravana Kumar Singh.
So I came up with this Bengali Chakraborty. Abhijit Chakraborty. Okay, because North Indian names are always have this some caste names associated with it at the end as a last name. So I just said, okay, Abhijit Chakraborty sounds very generic. Then one of the comment was like, that is not North Indian, that is East Indian.
They're culturally, I mean, eating habits are closer to South than North. Yeah.
And the second comment I always get is that this is Parottha. What we have is Paratha.
Yes.
Food expert.
Yes. So Paratha is a Punjab, the North Indian sort of Gangetic Plains thing of again predominantly wheat growing historically. And historically wheat, India, we would take the entire grain of wheat and then put it through these 2 big stones. And the entire grain of wheat is ground into the floor, including the germ and bran and everything else, right? So it is generally higher fiber and so on, but also has a shorter shelf life. Right? Because the bran and the germ will have fat and things, which will go rancid over time, and so on, right? So historically, that is what they used to use, right? Once industrialization came about, we started using machines to remove the bran and the germ, right? Then we would grind the starch part, endosperm, and then this would also be ground, and then they would mix it back to make the atta. So therefore, now you could make atta with varying levels of fiber based on what the market wants. Right? And so, because wheat consumption in South India came much later, over time, and in fact, the first, because at that point of time, because of the lack of preservation techniques and short shelf life and so on, the first category of wheat that kind of came to South India was maida only, right? Because it was it was seen as working class people. It does not spoil at all because it's only just the starchy endosperm, no fiber, and none of the bran and germ. So that's what was introduced during the World War around that time and so on. It became a thing that was supplied to working class people. So the Parottha that we know originally comes from Jaffna. So that is why Ceylon Parottha is actually the original, the OG Parottha is from Jaffna, where Malayalis and Tamil working class people who used to work in the tea plantations in Sri Lanka, they got used to that Parottha, which then brought it to Thoothukudi and to Tamil Nadu and to Kerala as well. So the first thing is that Malabar Parottha is not from Kerala. It's originally from Ceylon, and it reached Kerala in the 1960s.
Wow.
So they did not have it before that, right? And then, so therefore, as wheat became a little bit more popular, then other forms that were introduced were rava, right? That is again, right? So semolina, right? And then as atta became popular around the time when people started to be more conscious about diabetes and obesity, India became wealthier and so on, that in the South Indian habit of eating chapati for dinner became a thing. That Punjab style atta was considered too fibrous and too much work. See, rice is just, we all eat, we eat biryani, and so you can eat so much so easily, it's hyper palatable, right? That atta is not, right? So most of the attas that you normally get here is relatively less on fiber than that, right? So in general, what I see is that the paratha is more of a traditional North Indian dish, but you have to look at it from the point of view of the fact that while it's made from atta, right, it is stuffed often with potato and many other things. If it's an aloo paratha, for example, right? And even if it is not a stuffed paratha, it is still layered, and each of the layer is separated by fat only. Okay, it's usually ghee. Okay, so it is a pretty high calorie, right? It is your typical aloo paratha may have roughly if not slightly more calories than a typical Malabar paratha.
Correct.
Right? In terms, it's actually bigger in size also. It will be like some huge.
Exactly.
That it will be one giant, like a 12-inch pizza. It will be, right. So it is a.
Is that the same thing homemade as well?
They make it homemade. Yeah. And they may not make it that big at home, but still.
But
they will still melt. In Punjab, I've seen they will order a parotta, then they will order one Amul butter 100 grams packet.
Wow.
They will cut it into 4 pieces and melt it on the paratha, family of 4, and eat. Wow. That much butter.
That much butter.
Yeah. Oh. So I think you have to look at it through that context, right? So it is that as part of a larger overall healthy diet, they're all fine. I mean, they're all traditional. What's the point of food if you can't enjoy your traditional food? But to somehow say that, wow, that is very superior to Malabar Parottha, no, boss. If you're only eating a diet that is generally balanced and filled with parathas, not going to be healthy.
Right. So that's what I say in my videos as well. I mean, basically, I focus on moderation and decreasing the amount. Correct, and everything. Yes. The other problem that I get when I talk about fiber is that the vegetables that is available in the market is not very nutritious. So we need to buy organic. And, and the one thing I know is that in US and also here, then we call something a dirty dozen. Where they list down these are the top 12 vegetables. Spinach, tomatoes, top the list, and strawberries. Where pesticides are used a lot. So if you are affordable, please get organic. Is that the same thing happening all over the world?
It is more or less all over the world. But so again, if you go back to that list of food-related risks that we spoke about, right? Pesticide residues is literally very, very much below. They've not reached the level of problem where the amounts are not big enough, and especially if you wash your vegetables, they're not as much of a risk. We have not found any direct problems at that scale, right? They may become a problem. We may discover that they may have been a very long-term problem, but so far we have not seen any evidence of that. So far they are relatively low risk in that standpoint, right? And again, from a purely risk calculation standpoint, the second factor to consider is that we know that there is a 100-year study that showed that the amount of micronutrients, right, vitamins, minerals, and other, polyphenols and all of that, they have gone down in vegetables around the world as a result of soil degradation.
Soil degradation in general.
Over the last 100 years, globally, again, because also in 1900, world population was 1 billion, right? And I keep saying that one man was responsible for it becoming 8 billion now. Two people, Haber and Bosch. We all learned in school. Haber and Bosch invented the process to convert atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia, right? That then allowed them to make fertilizers. So basically, what you need to grow more crops is more nitrogen, right? Because amino acids, protein require nitrogen, right? So unless you get nitrogen into the soil, and historically, the only way to get nitrogen in the soil is to grow dal, chana, rajma, all the legumes, because they have the nitrogen fixing bacteria. So that's why farmers would grow rice, then dal, then rice again. So in Mexico, they would get corn, rajma, corn. So only way to replenish the soil was to crop rotate with legumes, right? That only maximum allowed a population of 1 billion on the earth. Till Haber and Bosch said, now we can industrially produce nitrates, potassium nitrate, that nitrate in the lab and in the factory, and agricultural productivity went up by a huge margin, right? So now the world is able to support. Again, it has had longer term environmental consequences, overuse of fertilizers, soil degradation. We are squeezing more crops out of that to feed 8 billion people, right? So it's natural, therefore it's not it's a universal thing. But even then, so now you can say that look, if I grow it organically, that I'm probably going to get more micronutrients in these. And again, the other logic is also that plants produce the flavonoids and the antioxidants to fight bacteria and fungi. So the more it is exposed to pests, the more flavorful it is, and therefore the more micronutrients it has, right? So that's the reason why when organic is done well, then it has the flavor advantages and those micronutrient advantages. That said, at this point, multiple studies say that the improvement you get in your life by simply eating more vegetables is significantly higher than the incremental improvement of eating organic versus non-organic. So therefore, I feel that we should not be shaming people who cannot afford organic. Right? So it is like you've bought a 2 BHK house, but now you want a fancy sofa, right? And the guy who does not have a fancy sofa must not be made to feel bad that I have a 2 BHK house, but I don't have the fancy sofa. You have a 2 BHK house, right? So that is what it is about vegetables. Just you eating more vegetables and making sure that you're washing the vegetables. You're already doing amazingly well. So you don't break your head that you cannot afford organic. So if you're rich and privileged, then you can now afford to say, now I'm already getting all my basics. Now I want to squeeze more out of that. Let me go organic. I don't want even the slightest amount of pesticide residue. I want this much more flavor. Right, and all those things you can afford to do. Right, for most people, it's not particularly important.
What's your take on this GMOs?
See, GMOs on the first one. This is sometimes controversial, right? Technically,
I'm a layman on that.
Right. Yes. So technically speaking, on the one hand, everything we eat is genetically modified. Now, how did 10,000 years ago rice did not exist? The rice plant we grow today did not exist. What existed was something called a wild rice, which is like a bamboo plant. Right? So all rices are also grasses. Right? So it should be 10 feet tall. Human beings saw that 10 feet tall thing and they found that it's having these grains that when you boil, etc., seems to give, nourishment. And then over thousands of years said, how can we make this plant shorter? And how can we make this produce more of those grains? Earlier, it used to produce one set of this thing on multiple branches. They said, can I artificially select for the one where it is putting all the grains on one branch? So it's easy for me to harvest. So human beings over thousands of years did artificial selection. Right? Artificial selection means that I take the plant, I look at all variations in next generation, and I only take the ones that have the features I want. Then I cross-pollinate it and only grow that. That's how we got all our crops. Right? So people somehow don't realize that is genetic modification actually. The only difference is you're doing it over many generations. But you're still doing it faster than nature will. Because you are interfering with nature. Right?
Correct.
People suddenly have a problem. If I do it, if farmer does it over 10 generations, that is natural. But if I do it in a lab and edit one gene and get the feature I want, that is considered GMO. Right? So therefore, there is a larger perception and understanding issue with GMO. But to be fair, the other side of the story is that since genetic modification in the lab is done by large companies who have also made modifications that are ethically dubious. Like for example, they have produced varieties of seeds that plant will not produce next generation of seeds. So the farmer has to keep buying the seed from the company. They're called terminator seeds and so on, right? So there are many unethical business practices associated with GMO which have given GMO a bad name. A multi-year study has shown that there is no health danger from consuming GMO crops. But because of all of these other ethical issues and so on, many countries can still continue to ask for a ban, or they say that you have to label it as GMO. All that is fine. I think individuals deserve to know that the labeling is always important. But in general, there is no evidence that GMO crops are bad for you in any sense at all. And here's the interesting thing. We are on the precipice of climate change. Many parts of the world where we do agriculture, we will not be able to do agriculture unless we arrest climate change. And many parts, it has already gone to the point where, like coffee, for example, in many places, you won't be able to grow in 10, 15 years time, right? Which means that somebody has to figure out a way to produce a GMO coffee that will grow, right, in these places. Like for example, now Arabica coffee is what we're used to. Robusta coffee now is becoming more popular because it is less picky about climate. So, and it can grow in lower altitudes. Otherwise, Arabica coffee grows only in higher altitudes, colder temperature, yet moist. So, those kind of conditions are going to be rarer and rarer. So, it is possible that 10 years down the line, without GMO, we won't be able to feed the planet. You will need to genetically modify many of these crops. Otherwise, you won't be able to feed the planet. So, I think people have to appreciate that. I'm not saying you have to eat GMO. You have the choice not to. But I think using that activism to prevent research and prevent access to people who can actually benefit from it, right? I think is really unfortunate. I hope that even in India that we are able to encourage more of that, because I think agriculture is under a serious crisis. I think we need to encourage more innovation and more ability to do that while preventing the capitalistic excesses of that kind of exploitation that we've come to associate with big food industries. Yeah, that's the thing. But otherwise, from a purely health standpoint, makes
nothing
no difference.
major. Yeah. So that brings the next question in terms of organic milk.
Yeah.
And A1, A2.
And this is very dead simple, right?
And I'll tell you my gastroenterology perspective,
Yes.
that when a baby is born,
yes,
gut bacteria is filled with lactase.
Correct.
And the complex carbs
yes,
in breast milk has
yes,
something called HMO.
Yes.
And HMO feeds a good gut bacteria, but
yes,
other complex carbs has to be digested by lactase.
Correct.
So 2-3 years, you have such an abundant lactase.
Yes.
As an evolution,
yes,
lactase goes down beyond a certain period of age, which is 25 to 30 years of age.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is why many people are not able to digest milk.
Correct.
And when they come to me for bloating, the first thing that I say is, okay, give a trial of eliminating milk.
Eliminating, yeah.
And then see whether that is working or not.
Yes.
Some people say that A2 milk
yes,
is okay for them.
Correct.
What is the pathophysiology?
So, first and foremost, right, so there are many myths around A1 and A2. People will say A2 milk is traditional Indian cow. And so on. That is actually not true, because A1, A2 milk exists in Europe also, exists in North America also.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So it is just so the difference is actually one protein, one amino acid in one alpha casein. That is the only difference. Everything else is the same, and etc. When it is metabolized, in some rat studies, they found that there is one molecule called BCM7 that is produced that may have long-term impact on the gut and so on, right? And again, nothing very strong, significant and so on, right? Now, but on that alone, there's a ton of marketing that people have created about A2 milk is traditional Indian milk and all of that, right? And the interesting thing here is that I've heard a lot of NRIs particularly say that in the US, they are people with varying spectrum of lactose intolerance.
Correct.
They are able to tolerate A2 milk a little bit better than A1
Absolutely.
milk. So again, the point here is that milk is very, very different based on whether it's buffalo milk or whether it is cow milk or which breed of cow, which season. Milk is always going to vary.
Mm.
So it is just that whatever you grew up eating, consuming in your early part of life, you're probably comfortable
Digesting that.
that,
Correct.
right? So sometimes people in South India who go settle in North India and sometimes drink North Indian milk in North India, and they sometimes have bloating as adults. And then they don't say A1, A2 milk and all that. Right? They, at that point, it's like they're probably not able to digest milk, and then they just slowly reduce milk consumption in general, right? So I really think that drink the milk that works for you. And if the moment milk is causing you bloating, digestion, that's probably time to reduce dependence on milk. And by the way, just consume the fermented version. Right? I mean, less lactose in yogurt and buttermilk and those other variants. If you want the benefits, you can still consume those things. Right? It's not essential in that sense, right? There are other, if you're consuming it for protein as a vegetarian, right, and so on. Paneer and other things also are relatively low on lactose. It still has some, but it's okay. It won't be that bad and so on, right? And nowadays you also do get lactose-free milk also, right? Because they are adding the enzyme ahead of time and digesting that, right? So people have a problem with processed, ultra processed, GMO, non-GMO. One interesting side thing is that you mentioned GMO as the diabetes capital of the world, right? How do you think insulin is produced? Insulin is produced by a genetically modified organism. It's produced by a yeast. That's been, the human DNA has been transplanted into the yeast to produce the human insulin. Right? So that is how we produce insulin.
The insulin that we inject.
Yeah, the insulin that you inject is produced by a genetically modified organism. So you can't have a problem with that. So you're also relying on that and putting it into your body for the most to keep you alive. Right, yeah.
So milk is okay.
So milk is, eat the milk that works for you. Forget all the marketing. And one funny thing I will say, people pay a huge premium for A2 ghee.
Is it right?
Difference in A1 and A2 is protein. What is ghee? Is fat. You've removed all the protein. There is no difference actually. And yet people pay a huge premium. So you might want to think about that. So you're paying for marketing. Right? Maybe you're paying for the organic nature of this thing. Maybe there's a bigger story. Right? So the guy who was making A2 ghee might say that I have a better farm. I'm only grass feeding the cows. The cows are better taken care of. Yes, it's fine. You want to pay for that. You can afford to pay for that.
Right.
But remember, then you're paying for that. The A2 has nothing to do with it. Because by the way, that A2 protein was all discarded when they first churned the milk, took the butter out. Most of the A2 protein was already there in the remaining thing. And then when you heat the butter down and remove the filter, all the last bit of the protein solids that become that very delicious part of that when you make the ghee. That is the few bits of protein that undergo the Maillard reaction. You've removed all of the A2. There is no clarified butter is only 100% fat. Okay, so there is no protein there. Yeah.
So coming back to the follow-up conversation, is the ghee part.
Yes.
Okay, so from a gastronomic standpoint, I say that ghee is good in minimal quantities where you have it is saturated fat.
Correct. Yeah.
But too much of saturated fat is a problem. Medium to moderate is okay.
Yeah.
Again, the consumption is the problem.
Yeah.
In South India,
yes,
I don't know whether you have seen this. My mom gave me idlis.
Yes.
Okay. In the idli, she puts a hole in the idli on the top.
Yes.
Where you put the ghee.
Ghee. Okay.
And then there's a podi.
Yes.
And then you create a hole in that podi.
More. Yeah. Yes.
More ghee.
Yes.
Which is ghee bad? That amount is bad.
Yeah, that amount. Yes, exactly.
But the minimal amount is okay.
Yeah.
But on a bigger scale,
correct.
What is your take on ghee versus oil?
Yeah.
And how do you guide us?
This has actually been if you look at is one of those fats is one of those places where if you just strictly go by just scientific papers, you'll be thoroughly confused. Okay. What is more, not just thoroughly confused, over a 50-year period, there has been a lot of bad science also and commercially motivated science also. Okay, right? So that is a problem. Right? You and me also grew up in an India where fats were demonized far more than necessary.
Absolutely.
Nobody said anything about carbs and fats. People used to be so careful about fats. Low fat. And now we know that was the bad idea. Right?
Correct.
Now the problem is, now that we've come to start consuming more fats, people are now obsessing over what fat, right? depending on where you look, you can find enough studies to prove monounsaturated is best, polyunsaturated is best in under these conditions. Hey, but look, the French eat saturated fat, Malayalis eat coconut oil,
Right.
Indonesians eat palm oil, Punjabis eat ghee. So all of these are again multivariable. Lot of confounding variables are there, right? Again, as I said, the Mediterranean people are probably healthy because of the rest of their diet, not because of the saturated fat or the butter, right? And likewise, I think rural Punjabis may be eating a lot of vegetables and a lot of other things, and so the ghee by itself is made, the amount of ghee they're eating may not be affecting them as much, right? We may not be observing it. Food is, unfortunately, you see, in a rat, you can just feed it one thing and test to see what happens. That would be a human rights violation. Human beings, unfortunately, right? So we can't really be sure, right? So the interesting thing about ghee, other thing I've also seen is that in general, the only thing you can say is amount of fat in your diet as a proportion. Are you getting 30% of your calories from fat? Or are you getting 15% of your calories from fat? That is a far bigger problem than whether you're eating extra virgin olive oil or whether you're eating refined palm oil, right? And the second thing is that it is impossible to nail down one ideal fat for everything. So in general, consume a mix of fat.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And in that, that's what they say that, and in that, keep saturated fat to like 10% of your total calories. Right? Even if you're traditionally a saturated fat consumer, keep it to 10% because we're not sure, right? Because a third factor here is genetics. It looks like there are populations that can consume saturated fat and have fewer heart problems than other populations. And we haven't done enough genetic studies on Indian populations to nail that down. Right? So I know, for example, I was listening to this podcast about how they are now doing gut bacteria genetic tests. So they're looking and seeing what is the profile of your gut bacteria to then say you should eat this food. Because they actually say rather than your own genes, we are going to soon in the next few years be able to tell people, gastroenterologists will be able to tell people, eat this because this is the profile of your gut bacteria. This is what you need to eat for you to be so. And they're seeing great results in some of the early tests.
Correct.
Seeing, right?
They have the genomic sequencing of the whole gut bacteria.
The gut bacteria rather than your own genes. That is a much bigger impact and so on.
Remember, right? That's 100 trillion.
100 trillion. It's a very hard problem, right? It has to be affordable and so on. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So in general, I think the ghee thing again is that if you're consuming it in moderation, it doesn't really matter, right? So I know there are some studies that will say that in general, the most evidence seems to be there for monounsaturated.
Correct.
Is like
PUFA is good,
right? And then PUFA is good, but too much PUFA versus the ratio omega-6 versus
omega-3.
Yeah, that can be a problem, right? So and so on. That because of some evolutionary quirk that we have we
developed.
We developed where we tend to overuse the omega-6s and so on, and we are not able to synthesize enough omega-3s in our body. Right? And again, Indians also think that the fish they are eating from the Bay of Bengal is giving them omega-3. No, only the big fatty fish, the cold water fish is where you get salmon and cod, and that is where you get most of the omega-3.
So this is not the omega.
Not much.
I see.
Yeah, not much at all.
All right. So we're talking about all this hormones and injections, all those things. We are towards the end. We will talk about this.
Yes.
Broiler chicken.
See, again, it's a very...
So to our US audience, please explain what a broiler chicken is.
Yeah. So essentially, in India, historically, the chicken incidentally originates in India. It is said to have been domesticated somewhere in India, in east of India, like some 9
Chicken originated?
Yeah. So jungle fowl was the original bird that was domesticated in this part of the world, somewhere in East India or southern China. That part, northeast part. And then it kind of eventually now has become the most consumed meat in the world. Right? And the reason for it becoming that most consumed meat in the world is because we've eventually slowly bred these chickens to be larger and larger and move even less, produce even more eggs, have larger and larger, more amounts of meat, etc., etc. Right? Sort of like the country chicken. So in India, if you go to the village, the country chicken has a completely different taste. Right? It is completely lean, very little meat, very lot of more muscle fiber,
but tastier
and tastier more because but that's the diet, right? So it is
their diet.
it is eating everything.
Oh.
It's eating insects. It's eating variety of things.
Their gut bacteria is good.
So here they're being fed fed only grains, right? One mono single diet, right? And corn and a few things like that, and that's really all it is that these. So the industry. So over time, companies ended up producing breeds of chicken which are now almost 3-4 times larger than 100 years ago, right? And the beauty is they've been able to do that simply like how farmers have. Even your tomato size has grown. Right? Even your everything, all oranges have become bigger. Everything has become actually bigger. So the chicken has also become by the same simple artificial selection. These are not even genetically modified. Simply artificial selection, they've actually made them bigger, and they keep those their genetic stock. That's a very close IP of these companies. A few big, large chicken producers in the world they have. So that. And they've largely turned this bird into something that you can then make in a factory mode, like this huge number of cages. The bird barely moves in its entire life, and it grows very large very soon, right? It is exceedingly sort of prone to infections, and so sometimes there is a concern that they have to use a lot of antibiotics, which antibiotics are then driving the antibiotic resistance, right? Because of the use of that. All of these are definitely concerns, right? But at the end of the day, it has also become one of the most affordable protein sources, animal protein sources for most parts of the planet, right? Because people sort of think that you can't get many parts of the world. Milk is not a choice at all because of lactose intolerance and many other things. It's not a choice at all, right? So you don't have a dairy culture, right? So therefore, and for parts that are not on the sea, seafood is not an option, right? And so chicken has therefore by default become the most industrializable form of meat. And of course, in the US there is beef, and in China there is pork. But globally, chicken is the absolute. So that industrialized cage-based production of this is what we call the broiler chicken. Now, obviously, in general, when it comes to food, what I've found is that anything that is cheap, affordable, and widely consumed, rich people tend to look down on it. Okay? In that they will say, no, it must be hormones, it must be this, it must be chemicals, it must be steroids, and all of that, right? Now, to some degree, of course, antibiotics is a concern, very much a concern, because at the end of the day, yes, we know that they have to give them antibiotics, right?
And why do they give antibiotics?
Because these are birds that live very close to each other, completely cramped, and they live in completely filthy conditions, right? In the sense that they defecate, and it's very hard to keep cleaning, right? And so a lot of bacteria, salmonella, huge risk. So that's why chicken you should always cook to a much higher temperature than other animals, so beef or pork, etc. You don't have to cook to a very high temperature, right? But chicken, absolutely you have to, because salmonella is a huge risk. Like even in the US, like some 20-30% of all random chickens you buy from any supermarket will have salmonella. You better cook to 67, 80, 70 Celsius
kill salmonella bacteria.
To kill salmonella, right? Yeah. So that's why you should never consume undercooked chicken.
So they're giving antibiotics to the caged
they're giving the caged chicken. So that is a concern. And again, it depends, right? So if you're a premium producer, you're going to be far more responsible about it. If you're in the European Union, there may be more inspections about whether antibiotics are being used. And again, so you can sort of argue that sometimes in a country like India, that may not be there, right? So actually the same thing applies to organic. So organic vegetables in India are not very regulated. You can do whatever you want and call it organic. So that is genuinely a concern. But at the same time, for most people, that is literally the only affordable source of protein as well, to be honest, right? So it is. So you can at best say that we have to hold the companies to a higher standard. We have to regulate. You cannot be impractical and say that stop eating chicken, eat only country chicken. No, it's too expensive. There's not that much country chicken right? Available. Free roaming and all of that. And so it has to be a little bit of both there. But as I said, most Indian producers are not rich enough to use these growth hormone and these steroid injections. Those are phenomenally expensive. So people again forget basic biology, right? The people will say using growth hormone and all that. Growth hormone in any species is a protein hormone. Correct. It's not a steroid hormone.
Correct.
Proteins in the stomach acid get completely denatured, right? So there is no way if you eat anything that it affects you. And the other thing is that many of these hormones are species specific. right? Because if they have affected across species, then a lion and tiger is eating so many other animals. It will all be completely affected. No? Clearly, so because hormones are species specific, right? And in any case, your body. One is that your body is going to completely break it down, right? Yes, it is true that steroid hormones do not get broken down, and they can affect you. That's why steroid as medicines is effective, no? Because it's not getting metabolized, no? Right? So, but I think people. There are genuine concerns, but you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And you cannot say that no, stop eating chicken and all that. That's not a practical solution for most people, right? If you can afford it, eat country chicken. I don't think most people can, right? Cook it well, right? And that's really all there is to it, right? There's nothing.
Have you seen the US chicken market? You'll get so confused.
Yes.
They have caged chicken, cageless chicken, one-eyed chicken, two-eyed chicken.
So, there's a nice comic that says that in the US, when you go to the egg section and the chicken section, right, from cheap to expensive, right, it's actually more cruelty to less cruelty. So you pay less.
Correct.
There's more cruelty on the other side. That's basically what's happening.
Correct.
You're comfortable with that. That's all you can afford. You do that. But you want to pay more for less cruelty. All there. Nutritionally speaking, it's all the same protein. Okay, right. So that's people have all these beliefs. The brown egg is better than white egg. No, they're two different varieties.
Exactly.
All the same.
Super. Thank you so much. It has been a wonderful podcast. As usual, it has been a myth buster.
Yes.
Throughout, and it's always a wonderful thing to have a chat with you. Thank you so much for your
Great
time.
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.